The living room. For the past 3 years, this space has been a kind of final frontier for Valve, who have been taking aim at lucrative console dollars by creating a collaborative lineup of overpriced and underperforming Steam machines. But for the rest of us, the prospect of building and maintaining 2 gaming PCs at once is an expensive one. Which means their best bet at spreading PC gaming into the living room might be the Steam Link, a kind of stopgap solution to that awfully convoluted problem. Despite the enthusiast market this thing is aimed at, it has a small price point of $50 and a tiny footprint of about 5 by 3.5 inches. And that makes the Steam Link smaller and cheaper than a single video game, even though it could potentially fill the role of an entire new video game console if your situation can allow for that. It's the only Steam machine designed exclusively by Valve right now, and all things considered, it doesn't really fit into the lineup of Steam machines at all. Its operating system doesn't play games, but merely streams a video feed of them running on a computer somewhere in your house to a TV somewhere else in your house, with enough versatility for its controller inputs and such little input lag that the experience is remarkably similar, albeit more complicated, to hooking up a real $300 game-playing machine, be it a PC or a console. And after figuring out the quirks and workarounds this product does suffer from, I am seriously thinking of just replacing my living room PC with this thing entirely. There are 4 deal breakers that didn't just convince me to buy this thing in the first place, but also have me pretty excited about owning one. And the first one on that list is that it works with console controllers. But not super consistently, and not everything works in every way it should on your first try. Wired Xbox 360 and Xbone controllers work perfectly, as expected, but go into that Bluetooth menu and try to search for them wirelessly and the Steam Link will come up with nothing. Same deal with the PS3 controller, which is only good when you're wired. On the other hand, PS4 controllers may actually be the best choice for the Steam Link. They work wirelessly right out of the gate, and believe it or not, so does the Wii U Pro controller? It would seem that what's going on is an X-input wrapper built into the Steam Link that emulates an Xbox controller based on whatever the Steam Link was written to pair up with. This stuff isn't printed on the box and may not be supported officially, but the support is there nonetheless. And it strangely seems that Valve had a harder time cracking the Xbox controllers' wireless interfaces than they did for the Wii U Pro Pad. Huh. Go figure. But despite those inconsistencies, it's still a pretty great situation, since it means that the Steam Link is likely going to work with a lot of controllers you already have lying around, from the older direct input USB pads to Xbox pads to console controllers made by Sony and Nintendo. And in all those cases, if the wireless isn't agreeable, you can still get by if you have the charger cable handy. The downside, though, is that the Steam Link only has 3 USB ports, so you're 1 port short if you want to have a full 4-player party night, unless you have some PS4 or Wii U pads lying around. But you're actually likely to be 2 ports short, because it's a good idea to always keep a mouse plugged into one of those holes. And the reason being is that the Steam Link's PC streaming concept does require a lot of back and forth troubleshooting between the host and the client when something goes wrong. And for that, you're gonna need a mouse, as well as another feature that was a deal breaker: desktop support. If the Steam Link could only show you Steam's clunky big picture mode, I would have ran right the hell away. But fortunately, you can exit out of big picture mode and start viewing your desktop, at which point you might as well have your actual huge overpowered $1,000 gaming PC out in the living room right there with you, complete with any cable-cutting entertainment functions that it can provide, as well as productivity software if you want to do work in the living room for some reason. Hell, I edited some of this video on the TV just to see how it would do, and it performed quite well. When going from big picture to desktop, the Steam Link will try to emulate a mouse and keyboard with your controller, and I really wish you could just turn that off because it messes up non-Steam game inputs, which is a huge issue for a topic later in this video. But on our way there, know that while in desktop mode, your controller's analog stick moves your mouse cursor, your triggers act as left and right clicks, A is enter, and B is escape. Combine that with your operating system's on-screen keyboard of choice, and you have a way to get by without plugging in a keyboard and a mouse in a way that is a painfully slow workaround. But I don't recommend that because having at least a mouse is a damn near necessity for a lot of games that start up with a launcher, and for dealing with crashes. This is PC gaming after all. In fact, it's PC gaming with another layer of complexity added on top of it, and that is the extra can of worms that the streaming process introduces. Sometimes when a game crashes, the game process will terminate in addition to Steam itself, which is not normal operating procedure and breaks the stream. So then you have to go through the awkward process of opening Steam again while power cycling the link and starting the stream up again once more. And that's a bit of a necessary evil, which is why the Steam Link is a cheapskate stopgap solution compared to having an actual second PC in the room. There's a bit of a learning curve to pass before you can keep up the illusion of having a secondary fully upgraded gaming computer when you really don't. And the differences with that situation are most noticeable when you try to load up any kind of non-Steam game, which had me gambling for a crapshoot of compatibility. Most emulators will boot up and run fine, but with your controller being in desktop mode, it makes setting up their inputs impossible. Meanwhile, my GOG version of Witcher 3 just displayed a black screen on the link. The solution is to add those as non-Steam programs to Steam, otherwise the streaming client will get confused and won't hook onto the right window. Using this method, I was able to get that GOG Witcher up and running just fine, but emulators quickly created a headache of new issues. After launching, your mouse cursor becomes locked into whatever window you're streaming, and an emulator's toolbars are outside of those bounds. There is a solution for this problem though. Alt-tab out of the window on the host PC to unlock your cursor, then you can click on those options from the foreground. That's how you can set up your emulator controls, but that's still a hassle of its own because now your controls are stuck in that desktop mode where A is enter, B is escape, and the triggers are mouse clicks, so keyboard shortcuts for the emulator end up being input from your controller in the middle of your game. So after looking up how to sync your controllers, then adding emulators as programs to Steam, then alt-tabbing out to click on the toolbar, then looking up how to disable the emulator's keyboard shortcuts, you're finally good to play those emulators, which are like half the reason to have a living room PC out there in the first place. At this point, all these back and forth trips are beginning to poke holes in the Steam Link's entire concept, but when it's working, it does execute on that concept very, very well. Because it plays games with little to no perceivable input lag, and you can turn on these optional network stats to turn my wishy-washy subjective feelings into cold hard facts. Running this setup on a wired home LAN had this box pinging the host PC every 1 millisecond. For comparison, the mid-range HD TV I'm streaming this to has a response time of 5 milliseconds. But that's just a network ping. It's not a barometer for measuring the video processing time that actually creates input lag. What's actually relevant are these streaming latency stats here. Input latency is almost non-existent as well. In fact, if you bring a wireless controller synced to the Steam Link over to the host PC, it'll feel like it's synced to the host instead. Which makes me think that the game-breaking number you actually want to be paying attention to is the display latency stat, instead of all these others. This must be the time it takes for those two boxes to process a frame and send it over to each other, and it's usually hovering around the late 20s, early 30s milliseconds for most games. And again, at that level, it's a barely noticeable passage of time. I swear, if I walk my controller over between the two machines, I'll feel the difference, but when I'm looking at just one screen by itself, I really don't notice those 30 milliseconds go by. As you can see by analyzing this very scientific video demonstration, this camera recording at only 30 frames per second is showing the delay last about 4 frames, which is actually 133 milliseconds at 30 FPS. The actual frame delay of the Steam Link cannot be measured more precisely than that on my camera. The game's running at 60 FPS, it's just too fast to really record the precise moment of the input and then the response. But the real test, what separates the men from the boys, is how it performs in some of the most timing-intensive Twitch challenges out there. The fighting game test is something that Steam's in-home streaming failed ingloriously on my setup last year, and this year it actually passes. You can play fighting games with it. You're not gonna want to host a tournament on one, but for inviting over some friends for some casual brawls, it'll do just fine. In fact, I have never been able to pull off the max super drive cancel in the King of Fighters 13 tutorial until just a few nights ago, on the Steam Link. Of course, it probably wasn't because of the Steam Link, but probably more likely because I was using the PS4's D-pad instead of the Xbox's, but the fact that a move with such specific timing can even be done here shows that when this box is working, it's working really damn hard to get those frames to you fast. So fighting games are fine. Pretty much anything 2D is fine. Shooters are fine. Sneakers are fine. The outlier, though, was Rocket League. The stats were displaying a 45 to 50 millisecond display latency there, which is why I think display latency is the key number. Because in that game, I could feel it. A bit of input lag was definitely there, no argument about it. 45 milliseconds is still an absolutely minuscule amount of time, but it would seem that the window for me to even notice it seems to lie somewhere between 35 and 45 milliseconds. Because every other game in my library I was able to play fine without a second thought. Hell, even the mouse cursor feels fast and responsive in desktop mode. But of course, this all was with a wired connection. When switching over to wireless, I quickly learned that that was not the way it's meant to be played.
Now, scramble away what's left of my forward body and loose root health. If I thought things through, I may have sat down and let myself burn right there.
On top of increasing all latency stats across the board, I also got scratchy skipping audio and all these extended freezes after flipping on the wireless switch. Wi-Fi is not optimal for gaming because of that instability, and in this case, watching the painful and gory struggle of a game trying to be displayed over Wi-Fi really hammers that fact home. It's the polar opposite of the wired experience, where you could easily fool people into thinking this wasn't streaming a game at all. Except for Rocket League. Rocket League does leave the Steam Link with a little bit of catching up to do. Because of the video compression needed to make this work, fast-paced 3D games with blurrier screens and rapidly changing camera angles are going to tax this system harder than anything else. Which is why a smoothly optimized lightweight game like Rocket League will wade you through higher streaming latencies compared to Fallout 4, which is much more demanding on the host hardware but streams perfectly. But waiting an extra 10 milliseconds for a button response in Rocket League is a minor issue when judging the overall package, because what's much bigger is the long list of user experience concerns that are likely to keep this thing from ever being for the mainstream. Not that that might have been their idea in the first place. For starters, there's no on or off button. You turn it on by mashing buttons on whatever input is plugged in, and you turn it off through a menu on the software side of things. That's a weird quirk, sure, but also consider that somehow this thing is crashing games on me at a higher rate than whatever I was getting before. Once that happens, the box gets left in a black screen limbo where restarting it somehow is necessary, be it through the software menu on the host screen or by, God forbid, yanking its power from the wall outlet. And when that hiccup happens, it crashes Steam, which means you gotta move back to the host computer to relaunch Steam to get things going again. Add that into the back and forth trips to get non-Steam software like emulators working properly, and the prospect of replacing a living room computer with a Steam Link begins to shrink. Unless you're me. My current living room computer is ancient. It's from 2008 and can't even play the Steam port of Resident Evil 4, which would have been a great couch game. And since I'm in a comfy little bachelor pad, the back and forth trips between the two computers aren't much of an issue, and neither is laying out an Ethernet wire between rooms. I had a bunch of friends over to play some local party games with this thing the day after I got it, and everyone had a blast. But only once we passed the first learning curve of setting up the controllers, and also turning the TV to game mode for the new video input, which I forgot to do. But this thing does serve a purpose. There's a wide selection of local multiplayer games and console ports on Steam that are better enjoyed from a distance or in a room full of friends, and the Steam Link does a fantastic job of bringing them out there. And the strange reality of my situation is that even with all of the Steam Link's user experience problems, it is still a superior experience than using my current living room PC, because my current living room PC can't even play Duck Game at a smooth frame rate. Of course, it won't stack up against a more well-equipped PC being there in the room, but the price curve of compact mini, micro, and ATX hardware is exponential compared to a full desktop. In practice, the Steam Link functions less as a standalone TV box than it does as an additional peripheral for your current gaming PC. But at $50, it's definitely a better value compared to most of the alternative solutions for getting this kind of setup going. But you do deal with some trouble for those savings. But even then, the troubles do have workarounds. But to make that easier, Valve is gonna have to release some firmware updates. First on my list is giving us an easy option to disable the wonky desktop controller emulation, and second is to prevent those crashes. It may not be worth your time and trouble if you don't have some Cat 5 running through the house or if there's a layer of stairs between your gaming PC and the client TV, but if you can bridge that connection, then this thing is a blast. And I can't wait to just finish this video and go play some fighting games on it.